This video 300% contains spoilers about the X-Men film series produced by Fox, as well as the television series X-Men Evolution. Proceed at your own risk. As of late, there's been a resurgence in popularity for X-Men characters thanks to X-Men 97. To add to the hype, the Marvel Cinematic Universe has been teasing the X-Men's return to the big screen ever since Disney bought the rights to the characters. Charles Xavier and Hank McCoy have already made appearances in Multiverse of Madness and the Marvels, respectively, and there's never been a better time to be a fan of the X-Men in a televisual series or movie format. But before we step into a future of live-action X-Men gracing our screens, let's take a look at one of the most underrated X-Men cartoons that expertly handled one of the most underrated X-Men film characters. I'm talking X-Men Evolution's interpretation of Rogue, who as far as I'm concerned is the most valuable X-Men who has the most complex and well-handled storyline and character arc of any of the X-Men cartoons to date. And here's why. When we first meet Rogue, the only identifiable things about her from the comics are her white bangs and her green outfit. Everything else is completely original and quite the subversion of a character that fans have gotten to know from her run in the 90s X-Men cartoon series and the comics. In the 1992 X-Men cartoon, we see Rogue as an adult who is very confident in what she wants, incredibly independent, assertive in combat, and very forward about her romantic inclinations, which is ironic considering she is incapable of being in physical contact with another human being without putting their lives and her mental health at risk. X-Men Evolution takes this irony and runs in the other direction with it, showing us a teenage, introverted Rogue who has yet to come to terms with her powers and the impact they have on her life as well as her loved ones. It's a sensible route for the writers and showrunners to take with her character because adult Rogue would have had to go through some really messed up times and learn from them to become as confident in herself as we see in the 90s cartoon. And don't get me wrong, just because X-Men Evolution Rogue is going through it like any other teenager and popularizing social distancing before it became a global response to a pandemic does not mean she is any less of a girl boss than her older 90s counterpart. What X-Men Evolution does, and does well with Rogue's character specifically, is showing, well, her evolution, and bridging the gap between her teenage and adult self, regardless of the adult self being a different interpretation from a whole other universe. So let's get into when we first meet Rogue. Oh yeah, it's giving in media res because we don't even know her for 2 minutes before she's sapping a devastating amount out of a guy who has a crush on her. By accident, obviously. Dusty is not a murderer, but she ends up putting him in a coma for a hot minute and goes on the run for the rest of the episode, unsure of why her blossoming into teenagehood is becoming deadlier than she could have imagined. I mean, I guess deep down she knew that the world wasn't going to be a fair place for her or others like her, given that she had that whole goth thing going on, which, by the way, let's just have a moment of silence for her and how she absolutely served in that look. Like, she's literally the reason I wanted to be a goth in elementary school. Anyway, let's get back on track. As the episode continues, she gets gaslit by Mystique and Destiny into thinking the X-Men are trying to kill her, which honestly was giving when the Hellfire Club drove the Phoenix out of her mind. I love these little allusions to the 90s cartoon and other iterations of X-Men, even when they're using different characters to drive the point home. But yeah, Rogue is left to her own devices because now she has some serious trust issues and starts keeping a distance from literally everyone, which is basically like her energy absorption abilities personified. This already sets her apart from the rest of the X-Men recruits because unlike X-Men Evolution's introductions to Kitty, Nightcrawler, Cyclops, Jean Grey, Spike, and a whole lot of the other X-Men, Rogue is the only one who has some serious trauma that doesn't get resolved by the episode's end. She has to process her feelings of isolation alone, dig deep within herself regarding questions of morality and what doing the right thing means, and gathering the courage to persevere through her adversities, which adds depth to her character and would heavily influence her plotline for the remainder of the show. Honestly, she had more in common with adults like Wolverine than she did with kids her age, which were the aforementioned Nightcrawler, Cyclops, Shadowcat, etc. So even though she's left as not being part of the X-Men, her introduction has the seeds planted for MVP status. So Rogue's powers are not only one of the most unique, but really set her up for success so long as the people handling her character's journey know what they're doing, which, in the movie franchise, they clearly didn't. We'll circle back to that, don't worry, I have a lot of thoughts on this. So, unlike in the 90s cartoon where Rogue had energy absorption, flight, super strength, and low-key invulnerability, like man was really out here being Superman, X-Men Evolution's Rogue exclusively had her energy absorption before the latter powers were alluded to have developed. That's because originally, yes, even in the comics, Rogue's powers have always been limited to energy absorption. The flight, super strength, and invulnerability didn't come into play until she met Miss Marvel, now commonly known as Captain Marvel, since too long of a hold on her led to Rogue permanently absorbing her powers, which literally made her even more MVP than with just the regular absorption abilities. But what's so great about Rogue's absorption abilities? Walk with me. Not only does she absorb people's superpowers, meaning she can use Cyclops' laser beams with control that Scott himself lacks due to his disability, but she can also absorb more than one power at a time, meaning there can be a Rogue that can change the weather with Storm's abilities and teleport herself out of a really bad situation with Nightcrawlers. The possibilities are endless, at least that's how Rogue is set up in X-Men Evolution, and that's what makes her a valuable asset to any team. A bit of a drawback is that this absorption allows her to take in and access people's memories, including languages that they know and fighting skills they have developed, along with their their traumas. Now, the same ability, minus the Miss Marvel powered version of Rogue, is the exact Rogue we meet in the 2000s live-action X-Men, which released about 3 months before X-Men Evolution aired. However, there is a stark difference between the goth Rogue we see in the cartoon and the one played by Anna Paquin in the live-action, with the biggest difference coming down to, you guessed it, use of powers. The film version of Rogue is a scared child who is a total damsel in distress, constantly finding herself in situations where she is either whining or in desperate need of saving, whether it's by Storm and Cyclops when she's stuck in Logan's truck, or by Wolverine when she's kidnapped by Magneto. X-Men Evolution Rogue could never. Even when she's scared, she chooses to test her own limits by putting her absorption powers to use, regardless of the fact that they can put her at risk, such as when she saves Cyclops, Jean, and Wolverine from the Blob, and then again when she saves Cyclops from Mystique. Film Rogue is heavily dependent on her community and relies on them to rescue her every time she has an overly emotional reaction to what life throws at her. In contrast, X-Men Evolution Rogue goes through similar events as Film Rogue and instead tries her best to get herself out of those situations on her own terms using her own powers, which would have done wonders for Film Rogue's character development instead of just being Logan's little sister and Bobby's love interest. And again, it's this difference that makes X-Men Evolution Rogue the MVP, whereas the film one is an insurance liability. Cartoon Rogue is able to work with what she has, not rely on anyone because she understands her strength, and is largely independent just like her 90s counterpart. Her powers might be incredible, but it's how she utilizes them and is actively trying to understand them that also sets her apart from the rest of the X-Men in X-Men Evolution. While Shadowcat, Spike, Jean Grey, Nightcrawler, and Scott do work on growing their powers, Rogue is the only one who goes out of her way to experiment with her high-risk, high-reward abilities. They take a toll on her emotionally, mentally, and physically, but that doesn't stop her from putting herself in harm's way while holding on to hope that she'll be able to do the right thing and protect the team she's come to love as a family. So it's not just about what Rogue was gifted with, but has a whole lot to do with what she chooses to do with it, and that's what MVPs are made of. Also, Film Rogue gives up her powers for a man who's low-key got a side chick. X-Men Evolution Rogue would never do that to herself. Shame on you, movie Rogue. And here's another cool part about her combat and agility. And this is another area that not only sets Rogue apart from the rest of her teammates, but also makes Rogue's fighting abilities super versatile. Because her powers rely on close contact, Rogue has to train herself in self-defense, cardio for speed, and hand-to-hand combat to compensate for lack of an active power, until she engages in skin-to-skin contact with her enemy. We first see her working on these skills in Season 1, Episode 7, Turn of the Rogue, where she finds herself at the gym processing her feelings of isolation and betrayal when she finds out that the X-Men are using a Danger Room version of her in their training simulations. So not only is Rogue channeling her aggression to something healthy by focusing on her physical health, but she's quite literally the only X-Man I can recall ever hitting the gym on a somewhat regular basis to work on her fitness. We know adult Rogue in X-Men the Animated Series is an apt fighter who can seriously pack a punch, so it's nice to see the writers planting seeds in evolution that are consistent with what makes a character so important to the X-Men team, regardless of whether she has her Miss Marvel powers or not. To really drive the point home, if X-Men Evolution Rogue found herself in X-Men The Last Stand and was one of the mutants that got the cure which rids mutants of their powers, she would still be a very skilled fighter who can take down her enemies without relying on her mutation unlike any of the other X-Men. I guess besides probably Wolverine. In the show, Rogue frequently relies on her quick thinking and agility to outmaneuver her enemies, whether she's dodging punches from the Blob before energy draining him, incapacitating Toad and Avalanche before sapping their powers, or seizing opportunities to touch and steal powers when Sabretooth, Quicksilver, Mystique, and or Magneto are distracted. Rogue consistently demonstrates her bad butt prowess. And the coolest thing is, she doesn't discriminate. That's right, Homegirl also saps the powers of her own teammates when needed, like when she absorbs Cyclops' energy to save his life, saps Jean's energy to help her adjust to her power surge, and copies Kitty's dance moves for, well, fun. Okay, maybe the last one wasn't that important, but I'm glad Rogue doesn't limit her super life-threatening powers to the battlefield and is open to using them recreationally. Practice does, after all, make perfect. So not only does how Rogue looks and what Rogue can do that contributes to her bad buttery, but it's also who Rogue is when it comes to her experiences and how she responds to them that really put her in the spotlight of just being the most awesomest X-Man ever. Yes, I know that wasn't English. Rogue starts off the series being scared, hopeless, and alone, distancing herself from her peers and hating the world that she was born into because of how cruel it can be. This theme is a huge part of her character, and it's also a driving force for her evolution. She dedicates a lot of her time to self-improvement, whether it's via fitness, X-training, fighting with the Brotherhood, helping out with her teammates, and all around trying to find a purpose where her powers are more of a gift than a curse. She also has her walls up quite a bit, but by spending time understanding her circumstances and those around her, she moves past those defenses because she's grown strong enough to protect herself when her walls are down. Sadly, she often deals with betrayal at the hands of Mystique, her adoptive mother, and this results in a lot of abandonment issues for her. What helps is her bond with Kurt, who is also Mystique's child, and then these two bond over basically how cruel their mom is and learn to be independent of her approval. So again, this is an example of Rogue taking trauma and then channeling it into something useful. To add to the theme of betrayal that haunts Rogue throughout throughout the series, she's also used as a pawn by Mesbro to bring forth Apocalypse, which adds to the mental and physical anguish that Rogue experiences on a day-to-day basis. So now, not only does she have to live with the fact that she can't get close to anyone romantically, but also that her powers were responsible for bringing forth one of the worst enemies that the X-Men would ever face, and one that has the ability to end the world. And yet, in the face of all hopelessness, Rogue's inner eternal optimist is alive and well, and Bestie finds a way to outsmart Apocalypse using the same power of hers that he used against her. Honestly, it's giving royalty behavior. And while she started off in a bad place, she ends the series on the other end of the spectrum, being empowered, hopeful, and surrounded by a family that loves and appreciates her as much as she does them. She also develops a romantic situationship with Gambit, and it's alluded that they'll end up together, and for anyone who has seen X-Men 1992, we all know how hot and heavy those two ended up being. And, oh yeah, she also totes ends up saving the world that she hates so much. Like, no, really, if not for any other reason, she secures her MVP status as being the one player left who had the ability to stop Apocalypse dead in his tracks and save her evil mother Mystique, Storm, Professor X, and Zaddy Magneto. Say it with me now. Iconic. And speaking of iconic, literally every time Miss Girl is given screen time, she's serving. But let's bring the runtime down to some pretty kick-butt scenes that have cemented her royal highness in the minds of her many, many fans, including myself. Number 1, her intro. Honestly, her look in X-Men Evolution was intriguing enough the first time we see her, but then her milkshake brought Cody to her yard and she started sapping and I was hooked. She spends the rest of the episode sapping multiple powers and is manipulating the weather and teleporting all over the place. Love that for her. Number 2, saving Wolverine, Cyclops, and Jean Grey. On paper, all 3 of these mutants are super powerful and capable on their own. Against the Blob and the circumstances that they were given, he almost got the best of them. Rogue once again puts her sapping more than one power at a time technique to use and shoots up the Blob using Cyclops' laser beams before using his own strength against him. It was quite the sight to see Rogue helping out the X-Men even though she didn't trust them too much at this point. Number 3, truth-seeking. When Rogue got privy to Mystique's gaslight, gatekeep, and girl boss agenda, she sapped the crap out of her and used her memories to figure out what was really going on, who the good guys were, and who the bad guys were, all along. Talk about being resourceful. Number 4, for recreational use. Remember this scene that was rotoscoped from the Buffy and Faith dancing scene from Buffy the Vampire Slayer? Aside from the fact that fans loved this scene, it wouldn't have been possible without Rogue's powers being used to copy some of Shadowcat's dance moves. Honestly, she was so real for this. Number 5, winning Magneto's Asteroid M game without using her powers. While all the other players that became qualified to go to Asteroid M were able to do so because of how they utilized their powers to defeat each other in a versus battle, Rogue just had to outsmart Toad in combat to score her ticket to Magneto's creepy sanctuary in the Season 1 finale. I love that Rogue just doesn't follow the rules and still gets to shine. Number 6, stabilizing Jean's power surge. It was honestly so cool to see Rogue, who has a largely passive power, go up against active-powered Jean Grey and be the stabilizing force in a situation that could have gone way, way out of hand. Number 7, sapping Magneto. Okay, this scene literally gives me the chills. Rogue has gone up against her fair share of bad guys, but Ma'am goes toe-to-toe with Magneto and on Angel's Wings, and it is legit one of the coolest fight scenes that highlights how much of a quick study Rogue is when it comes to learning the powers of another. Number 8, besting Juggernaut. By Season 3, Rogue is not messing around, and this is especially evident when she goes up against Juggernaut, saps his powers, and takes him on in hand-to-hand combat. She even pimp slaps him at one point. Right there! Wait, let's watch that again. Ugh, Mother is truly mothering. Oh, and then she throws him off a bridge. What a queen. Number 9, multiple personality disorder. Honestly, we've all been there, and Rogue's multiple personality disorder is a manifestation of all the personalities she's absorbed fighting to take control. Her power use in this episode is incredibly creative with the different combos of powers she employs and is a worthy sequel to Rogue Recruit, serving to measure how far Rogue has truly come along since we first meet her in X-Men Evolution. Number 10, taking down Apocalypse. This one really takes the cake. After absorbing Leech's powers to make mutant powers latent, Rogue gets her revenge against Apocalypse by putting a stop to his evil plans by quite literally shutting down the energy around him. Nobody uses Homegirl and gets away with it. And this list doesn't even cover all of Rogue's awesome powers, so if you haven't yet, go watch X-Men Evolution to relive all of Rogue's awesomeness because y'all already know I'm going to. And I mean, hello, by the end of the show, she quite literally saves the world. So yeah, her MVP status is secured for real as far as X-Men Evolution is concerned, and I love that for her. Shout out to being a mutant with a passive power that you can utilize so actively. Like, honestly, Rogue does not get the credit she deserves for all the things that she brings to the team, and I hope the MCU does her justice when she shows up in the live-action franchise. Actually, she should always be slaying this hard, if not harder, anytime she is in an X-Men adaptation, because the most valuable player deserves nothing less. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it, leave a comment down below about your favorite thing about Rogue and X-Men Evolution, and hit that subscribe button for more videos about superheroes, old school cartoons, media analyses, and more. I'll chat with y'all later. Have a good one. Bye.